I was never the type to get worked up about things. Life had taught me to keep calm, to roll with the punches. That is, until the day I found out that my wife, Natalie, had been hiding a secret I never saw coming. The warning signs had been there for months, the late nights, the subtle change in her behavior, the new perfume she started wearing. But I never connected the dots, or maybe I didn't want to. I trusted her. I believed in what we had built, what we were building. Then came the party. It was supposed to be a celebration, a chance for us to unwind and enjoy the night. But the moment I walked into that room, something in the air felt off. It wasn't the music, or the decorations, or even the people, it was the way she was looking at him. I didn't know who he was at first, but his eyes were on her with a hunger I hadn't seen in months, maybe years. He was too casual, too comfortable. That grin, it wasn't the kind of grin you give a friend. It was the kind of grin you give when you think you've already won. As I approached the bar, I saw him leaning toward Natalie, speaking too softly for anyone else to hear. She smiled, her back turned to me, oblivious or perhaps just playing along with whatever game they were playing. But when I stood behind her, I overheard the words that shattered everything. "Congrats, Jack. You're going to be a father," he said, his voice laced with arrogance. I stood frozen, unable to process. Did he just say what I thought he said? At first, I didn't even respond. I thought maybe I was hearing things. Maybe I had misunderstood. But as I turned to look at Natalie, my worst fears were confirmed. Her eyes met mine, and I saw something I hadn't expected: triumph. That smug smile had been replaced by something darker, something that told me she wasn't ashamed. She was proud. "Yeah," she said, her voice dripping with a false sweetness. "I'm pregnant, and you won't divorce me. We've got a no-fault separation clause, remember?" The world tilted. Betrayal didn't slap you across the face, it crept in slowly, until it was too late to stop it. The weight of it sank in, and suddenly, the house we'd built together felt like it was crumbling around me. But I didn't say anything. I simply nodded, smiled, and walked away. I needed a moment to breathe. Outside, I retrieved my car keys from the valet stand. When I came back, the room had changed. The music had slowed down. People were still laughing, still oblivious. And there she was, chatting with him again, like nothing had happened. Like we were still a couple, still living the lie. When she finally saw me, her smile faltered. Her hand reached out as if to stop me, but she didn't speak. She just looked at me with those wide eyes. "Jack, please," she begged. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. She could see it in my face, the cold detachment. She knew what was coming, even if she didn't want to admit it. I wasn't going to be the nice guy anymore. The guy who played by the rules, who swallowed his pain and kept smiling. No. I had a plan now, and it didn't involve forgiveness. I wasn't angry, not yet. But I was done. I had been planning this for months, gathering evidence, piecing everything together. She thought she had won, that she had outsmarted me. But she didn't know me at all. I wasn't the man she married anymore. I was someone else now, someone who had learned the hard way not to trust, not to forgive. I had been underestimated for too long, and now it was time to make them all pay. I drove back to the house in a daze. My mind was racing, but my body remained calm, moving through the motions like a man walking through fog. It wasn't until I opened the door to our home that it hit me: everything had been a lie. The house, once our sanctuary, now felt foreign to me. The walls were just walls, the furniture nothing but placeholders in a life that wasn't mine anymore. I should have felt angry, betrayed, but all I could feel was a strange emptiness. She had crossed the line, yes, but it wasn't about the affair anymore. It was about everything, the years I'd spent building a life, a business, a family, only to watch it all come crashing down because she couldn't be faithful. I locked the door behind me, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I sat down at my desk. I stared at the piles of paperwork, bills, contracts, property investments, all the things I had been handling while she lived her secret life. But now, everything had changed. I pulled out my phone and opened the hidden folder I had created months ago. The one with all the evidence I had gathered, emails, text messages, even photos. It was a timeline of their affair, a meticulously constructed web of lies. And now, it was my weapon. I was never one for confrontation. But I had learned something over the years: if you want to bring someone down, you have to do it with precision. You can't just charge in blindly and expect results. No, you need to think ahead, plan your moves, and strike when they least expect it. I had already filed the divorce papers, but that wasn't enough. I had to make sure this affair didn't just end with me walking away. No. I wanted to make sure everyone knew the truth, and I was going to do it in a way that left no room for denial. So, I started working. I contacted an old friend, Mark, who worked in corporate law. He was a little shady, but I needed someone who could help me dig into the financials. I needed to find out if Natalie had used company resources for her affair, and I needed to make sure her career suffered the way mine had. The following days were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and late-night research. As I dug deeper, I discovered more than I had expected. Natalie had been siphoning off funds for months, using company accounts to cover hotel stays, dinners, even travel expenses. I had known about her affair, but this was a whole new level of betrayal. I had the receipts, the bank transfers, everything. It was all there, just waiting for the right moment to be unleashed. But I needed one more thing, a piece of leverage to make sure she couldn't escape. That's when I found it. I was going through some old paperwork when I came across the prenup, the one we had signed years ago, back when things were still good. I hadn't given it much thought since, but now, it felt like a ticking time bomb. There, buried deep within the contract, was a clause I had completely forgotten about. A clause that would void any spousal support in the case of infidelity. I couldn't help but smirk. She thought she had all the power. She thought she could control everything, but now, I had the upper hand. I don't know how long I sat there, in the dim glow of my office, staring at the piles of papers that used to represent everything I worked for. Everything we had built together. Now they just felt like reminders of how much I had been blind to. The house, the family, the business, none of it mattered anymore. I was left with the wreckage of a life that I had spent years trying to perfect. And, if I'm honest, I wasn't sure how to feel about it. I should have been angry, furious even. My mind had been consumed by images of Natalie and him, of all the nights she came home smelling like someone else's cologne, of the moments when I'd been too tired or too trusting to see the signs. But there was no fire in me. Instead, there was a cold calmness, a sense of finality that I hadn't expected. I wasn't the man who used to throw tantrums over being wronged. I was a man who, now, had a mission. I took a deep breath and stood up, walking towards the filing cabinet I hadn't opened in months. Inside were the receipts of my life, the bills, the bank statements, the contracts. But now, the most important file of all was the one I had carefully created over the last few months. Hidden away from prying eyes, it was a folder of damning evidence. And right now, it was the only thing that mattered. The moment I had found the first clue, I knew this wasn't just about the affair. It wasn't even about revenge, it was about something deeper. A betrayal of trust, of everything I had believed in. I needed to make her see that this wouldn't just be something she could sweep under the rug. She wouldn't walk away without facing the consequences. I opened the folder on my desk. It was filled with texts, screenshots, emails, conversations between Natalie and Greg that were too incriminating to ignore. They had been meticulous in covering their tracks, but they made one fatal mistake: they never expected me to be watching. I'd learned everything I needed to know and more. The first email I read was an exchange from just a few weeks ago. They had planned their next business trip together, another excuse for their affair. But this one had a twist. They were using company funds to book the hotel, meals, and even some personal expenses. I stared at the email for a long moment. It wasn't just a betrayal of me, it was a betrayal of the company, of the life I had helped build. And I was going to make sure everyone knew it. I began copying everything, downloading receipts, archiving messages, taking screenshots. With each new piece of information, a sense of clarity washed over me. It wasn't just their affair that I was going to expose, it was the way they had lied, the way they had manipulated everything to suit their needs. This wasn't just about infidelity. This was about abuse of power, deceit, and betrayal on a level I couldn't have imagined before. But I wasn't done yet. I knew that Natalie had been using company resources to cover her tracks, and I knew I had to hit them where it would hurt the most, her career. That's when I contacted Mark, an old friend of mine who worked in corporate law. Mark was a bit of a wild card, but I needed someone who wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. He owed me a favor from years ago, and now, I was calling it in. "Mark, I need you to help me dig into Natalie's work accounts," I said over the phone. "And I need it fast." Mark didn't ask any questions. He was a professional, after all. "I'll get on it. You'll have the information in 2 days." 2 days later, I had everything I needed. Mark had uncovered what I had already suspected. Natalie had been using her position at the company to funnel money, using business trips as an excuse for personal expenses. Flights to expensive cities, dinners at high-end restaurants, and hotel stays, all charged to company accounts. But the real kicker? She had been doing it under my name. The corporate card I had once helped set up for her was still linked to my accounts. The moment I saw those transactions, I knew. I knew she wasn't just having an affair. She had been stealing from the company, and from me. I was no longer just a husband betrayed, I was a man with a purpose. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. The next step was easy, I filed for divorce. But I didn't just file. I made sure everything was airtight. I contacted an attorney who specialized in asset protection and reputational damage. The prenup we had signed, one that Natalie had always thought was a joke, turned out to be her undoing. I went over every detail. If she was going to fight me, I was going to make sure she lost, and I would make sure the world knew exactly why. I could feel my heart hardening with every step I took. I wasn't sure if I was doing this for myself, or if I was doing it because it felt like the right thing to do. I wasn't sure if I even cared anymore. But one thing was for certain, Natalie had underestimated me. That night, as I poured myself a drink, I glanced at the divorce papers. She would never see them coming. She thought she had all the power, but I was holding the cards now. The next day, I reached out to her, just to let her know I wasn't going to be a passive player in this. I called her cell, my voice steady but cold. "Come by the house tomorrow. We need to talk." And as I hung up the phone, I knew I wasn't just ending a marriage. I was about to expose everything. The day I asked her to come over, I could barely sit still. My mind kept racing, this was the moment when everything would change. For months, I had been sitting back, quietly gathering evidence, quietly waiting. But now, it was time to face her. I knew Natalie would try to manipulate me. She would try to twist the conversation, make me feel sorry for her, or blame me for something. She was always good at that. But I wasn't that man anymore. I wasn't the guy who would swallow the lies, nod, and walk away. I had a plan, and I wasn't going to let her turn this around on me. She arrived around 6 o'clock. The car pulled into the driveway, and I could see her silhouette through the frosted glass of the front door. Her steps were deliberate, as if she knew exactly how this conversation was going to play out. When I opened the door, she stood there, looking at me like we were still a couple, still living in the same world. Her expression was a mask of composure, but I could see the tension in her eyes. She was nervous. "Good. Jack, I didn't think you'd want to see me," she said, her voice soft, almost apologetic. I didn't let her in right away. I stood there for a moment, letting her feel the weight of the silence. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, but the edge was unmistakable. You were right about one thing, Natalie, I said, stepping aside so she could come in. You don't know who I am anymore. She stepped inside, and I watched her closely. The same woman I'd married, the same woman I thought I knew so well, now seemed like a stranger. Her posture was perfect, but there was something else in the way she carried herself. It was the look of someone who was trying to maintain control, trying to act as if nothing had changed. But I knew better. She sat down on the couch, crossing her legs like she was about to make some grand speech. I sat across from her, keeping the distance. I wasn't going to let her think this was going to be easy. I know you're upset, she began, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. I never wanted it to happen like this. But you have to understand, Stop, I interrupted, holding up my hand. Don't give me that. You think this is about your feelings? About some mistake you made? I leaned forward, staring at her. No, Natalie. This is about everything. About what you've done. What you've been hiding. The lies, the betrayal. The affair. But it's not just that. It's the fact that you've been using my trust and your position at the company to manipulate me. Her eyes widened for just a second, barely noticeable, but it was enough. She wasn't expecting this. She wasn't prepared for me to know everything. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice sharp now, defensive. She was trying to regain control, but I could hear the cracks in her calm demeanor. I'm talking about your little business trips. The ones where you and Greg were supposed to be doing work. You know, those trips you took using my company credit card? I slid a stack of papers towards her. And these are just the beginning. You thought you covered your tracks, but you didn't. You made one mistake, Natalie. You never thought I was paying attention. Her face drained of color as she picked up the papers, scanning the receipts, the emails, the bank transfers. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the documents. The truth was staring her in the face, and for the first time, she was forced to confront it. How did you, she stammered, but I wasn't interested in her excuses. I know everything. You thought you were clever, hiding behind company policies, using me as a pawn in your little game with Greg. I stood up and walked toward the window, looking out into the night. You thought I wouldn't find out. But I did. I've known for a while. And I've been preparing. Natalie set the papers down slowly, her eyes not meeting mine. I could see the wheels turning in her head as she tried to figure out what her next move was. I wasn't going to give her that luxury. Why? She finally whispered. Her voice was shaky now. She wasn't pretending anymore. Why are you doing this? Why go through all of this? I turned back to her, finally making eye contact. Why? Because you don't get to destroy my life, my business, my trust, and walk away without consequences. You thought you could manipulate me into being the good, dutiful husband, the one who never questioned anything. But now, it's my turn. She looked like she was about to say something else, but I cut her off. This isn't about saving our marriage, Natalie. This is about making sure you can't just walk away from what you've done. This is about making sure you understand that you can't just break people and expect them to stay down. Her face twisted with a mix of frustration and something darker. You think this is going to fix everything? You think this is going to make me regret what I did? She stood up abruptly, her voice rising. You're pathetic, Jack. You can't hurt me anymore. I looked at her without flinching. That's where you're wrong, Natalie. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to expose you. I'm here to make sure you can never pull this off again. I turned to walk toward the door, my mind clear, my heart steady. I've already filed for the divorce. I've already made sure you'll never see a penny of spousal support. Your career is over, and you're about to find out just how much I know. I stopped at the door, just before stepping out into the night. You're going to regret crossing me, I said, turning back to her one last time. And not just for what you did to me, but for what you did to yourself. The days that followed felt surreal. Every morning I woke up, the reality of what had just happened settled deeper into my bones. I had made the call, sent the message, and now it was just a matter of time before everything exploded. But what was she thinking? For the first time, I allowed myself to wonder about Natalie's state of mind. When I had seen her standing there, holding the documents, her face pale and full of disbelief, I realized she was finally coming to terms with something. Her perfect little world had crumbled. It was strange, really. A part of me felt nothing at all, and another part almost felt pity. Not for the woman she had become, but for the woman I once thought I knew. The following week, she reached out again. I ignored her calls. I didn't need to hear her half-hearted apologies or her fake promises. But then she sent me a message: "We need to talk. I need to explain." I didn't answer immediately. I wasn't some naive fool who would rush back into the fire. But a part of me knew she was coming. There was no way she would walk away without trying one last time to control the narrative. She would try to manipulate the situation, to paint herself as the victim, to somehow make me feel guilty for the choices she had made. I had to let her believe that I wasn't prepared for her to strike back. I wanted her to think she could still win this. So, when I saw her car pull up again, I knew what was coming. She walked into the house like she had every right to be there, her eyes carefully avoiding mine as if the shame didn't still cling to her. She didn't speak at first, waiting for me to say something. I stayed silent. She couldn't expect me to beg for her back, not after everything. "I've been thinking, Jack," she said, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the crack beneath it. "I've made mistakes. But we both have. You know, things weren't always perfect. We've both changed over the years." I raised an eyebrow, keeping my face neutral. She was trying to rationalize everything now. The affair. The lies. The betrayal. And the best part? She was doing it as if this was some sort of relationship hiccup, as if she expected me to just nod and accept it. "The thing is," she continued, her eyes locking onto mine, "I don't want to lose everything. I don't want this to destroy us. We have history, Jack. We've been through so much together. This isn't the way it should end." I leaned forward, my gaze unshakable. "No, Natalie. You don't get to pull that card. Not anymore. You've already decided how this story ends. You've been writing it for months behind my back. Don't stand there and tell me that you want to save anything. You want to save yourself, and you're using everything you have to manipulate me into letting you off the hook. But it's over." She flinched slightly, but quickly masked it with a deep breath. I could see the walls she'd built around herself starting to crumble, piece by piece. For the first time, I had control. And she knew it. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness," she said, her voice quieter now. "I know I can't have that. But Jack, we can at least figure this out. Let's not make it uglier than it already is." I stood up and walked over to the window, gazing out at the fading light. The house, once a symbol of stability, now felt like a cage. But I wasn't going to be the one locked inside it anymore. "I'm not doing this for you, Natalie," I said, my back to her. "I'm doing it for me. For my own peace. You've already made it clear you never cared about that." There was a pause before she spoke again, her voice almost pleading. "You don't understand. I've lost everything. Greg, he's gone. He's out of the picture. I never meant for it to get this far. I wasn't thinking straight." I turned around, meeting her gaze. "Oh, I understand perfectly. I understand that you wanted a way out, and you thought you could have it all. But you never thought about the consequences. You never thought about the damage you were causing. She swallowed hard, her eyes searching mine for something, an opening, a sign that I was going to soften. But there was nothing there. I've already made sure it all gets exposed, I said slowly, the finality of my words hanging in the air. Greg's little game with the company card? The dates? The receipts? They've all been sent to the board. And just in case you think that's all, there's the matter of the legal papers. You've breached your contract with the company, Natalie. You've misused company funds. I'm not letting you walk away from that. Her breath caught in her throat. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. You can't do this, she said, her voice breaking. Please, Jack. Don't ruin me. I'm not ruining you, Natalie. You did that to yourself, I said coldly. You chose this. You chose him. You chose to betray me, to use me. Now you'll live with the consequences. I walked past her, heading for the door. I could feel the tension in the room, the weight of the unspoken words still hanging between us. But there was nothing left to say. Goodbye, Natalie, I said as I stepped outside into the night, leaving her behind. I didn't feel any sense of relief or satisfaction, no rush of victory. What I felt, instead, was a deep, quiet certainty that everything was falling into place. The house, the business, my future, it was all mine now. And Natalie? She would have to face the fallout of her own actions, alone. The days that followed were quiet, almost too quiet. The silence in the house seemed louder than any argument, than any fight we'd had. But now, it wasn't just the silence of a broken marriage, it was the silence of a man who had reclaimed his life. I had expected her to fight back, to try to regain some sort of control, but Natalie never reached out again. After our last meeting, she'd been too stunned to speak. She couldn't undo what had been done. She couldn't erase the consequences of her actions. And even though I had no desire to be petty, I knew that exposing her to her company, revealing everything, wasn't just about revenge. It was about making sure she couldn't hurt anyone else like she had hurt me. I spent the next few weeks cleaning up the mess, not just the legal matters, though that was an exhausting process, but also the emotional wreckage. The house was still mine, as was the business. The board had taken action, as I expected. Greg was fired, and with him went any semblance of respect I once had for my colleagues. But there was no joy in his downfall. I had never been one to take pleasure in watching someone lose everything, but in this case, I didn't feel bad either. The damage was done. As for Natalie, she had packed up and left a week after our confrontation. I had expected her to put up a fight, but there was nothing left for her to argue with. No more excuses. She left behind only empty spaces, empty rooms, empty promises. And she took what she could, her clothes, her things, leaving behind a few remnants of the life we had shared. A life I no longer recognized. I wasn't angry anymore. At least, not in the way I had been. What I felt now was a strange peace. And that, I realized, was what hurt her the most. She had been expecting me to be destroyed, to crumble under the weight of her betrayal. Instead, I had built myself up again, piece by piece. It was over. And I had won. But in the end, it wasn't about winning, it was about regaining myself, about making sure I didn't lose who I was in the process. A week later, I sat at my desk, flipping through some old files, when I saw the letter. It was hand-delivered, the handwriting unmistakable. Natalie's handwriting. I've made my choices. You made yours. I'm sorry it ended this way. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just closure. I read it 3 times before putting it down. It wasn't the apology I had expected, but it was the one I needed. There were no excuses, no more manipulation. Just an honest admission of what had happened. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I had already closed that chapter of my life. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. Later that week, I received a call from Mark, the lawyer I had worked with. The divorce had been finalized. All assets had been divided, and everything was set for me to move forward without the weight of the past holding me back. "I'll be honest, Jack," Mark said over the phone, "this wasn't the cleanest divorce, but you played it well. No one's ever going to look at her the same way again. You've got your life back, and she's left with the consequences of her own actions." I hung up and sat back in my chair. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The weight had lifted. A few days later, I ran into someone unexpected. Tara Kelly, the architect I had met on that property deal a while back, called me out of the blue. "Hey, Jack. I was thinking," she said, her voice as sharp and confident as ever, "I know it's been a hell of a year for you, but I think you're ready to do something new. Maybe it's time you started building again, for yourself." It wasn't a question. Tara wasn't the type to wait for answers, but I could hear the excitement in her voice. I could tell she saw something in me that I had almost forgotten existed. "Maybe you're right," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in months. "Maybe it's time to start fresh. For me." We met up a few days later, and over coffee, we talked about new projects, new beginnings. She was starting her own firm, and I had a few ideas of my own for some investment properties. There was no rush. I wasn't looking to dive into something for the sake of distraction. But for the first time, I felt the spark of something new. Something exciting. Something that wasn't about revenge or the past, but about moving forward. As I walked out of that cafe, I realized that everything had changed. The man I had been was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone wiser. I had learned the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes, the only way to move forward is to leave everything behind. To stop chasing ghosts and start living for the future. I had no idea what was ahead, but I knew one thing: I was ready for whatever came next.